to Corporate Cafecito, a podcast based on professional development, career growth, and respecting our cultural identity. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Guest. And if you're like, where are you? Because this is not usually where we record. We are at the National Museum of Mexican Art, located here in Pilsen in Chicago, which is just is it the biggest collection of Mexican art outside of Mexico?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so too.
I believe so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you were from Chicago, born and raised here, this has always been like a homecoming, a place where you could come and see things, see Frida's collection, see different stories, come every year annually for Dia de los Muertos with the different altares. And it's just been such an anchor within a Mexican community to have this place. And we have a new president. So this year, José Ochoa has taken the reins of the museum. And so thank you, Juan, for being on the show. Our goal is to inspire and, have people be proud of where we come from and also understand all the different opportunities and how people got to where they are. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Jose.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it is such a pleasure to be here and to talk with your audience about the museum, which is, such a exciting time for me. It's a privilege, and I've just been so geeked out about it all, right? I love it. I'm so happy. So, but yeah, I am Tejano, so I grew up in South Texas. Mostly outside of Corpus Christi. I've lived in all parts of Texas, but
Did you see a Selena concert?
I did not. I think it was. I was in high school around the time she was really getting popular. I know that, like in the town. So I lived in a little town called Robstown, which is west of Corpus, and it was the town that like everyone had to pass through. So a lot of people sing about Robstown, and then so every Tejano artist drives through it, right? And nice. So it's possible that she probably sang maybe at a quinceañera or something before she was really really famous. But yeah, it was a really interesting time in the late 80s, early 90s to be around. That's when we were, going from being Hispanic to Latino, right?
Yeah,
which is a thing. But yeah, I grew up in South Texas in a small town called Robstown, Robstown, and I spell it because some of you may want to look it up. But it's a very interesting place to live. Really, it was one of the most formative times of my life, right? Robstown is known for a few things. It's, I believe Texas Hold'em was invented there, I guess, something like that. But the other thing is that our high school mascot was, and is still called, the Cotton Pickers. And most of the times when I talk about that, people
are like, "Oh, we don't say that anymore."
No, they gasp and, "Oh my God," and like feel sorry for us. And I understand that reaction. During the pandemic, there was a lot of like pushback, people wanting to change it. And usually the folks who wanted to change it had never been to the town and didn't understand. And, the people of that town are racist. But the thing that folks don't understand about Robstown and where I come from is that the cotton pickers are us, right? Now, I did not ever work in the fields, but some of my friends did. I remember in 7th and 8th grade, some of the kids would be pulled out of school in the afternoon to go work, right? This is in the late 80s, American citizens that I went to school with, right? And so most of my friends, their parents, their grandparents, our teachers, lawyers, the judges, the bus driver, everyone picked cotton, right? So for us, cotton pickers is not an embarrassment, right? It's actually a badge of honor. I think a little bit about like the N word or the F word or the B word, how different words are being captured by communities and they're owning these words. I kind of think about the cotton pickers in that way, is that it's our word. Now, Now, growing up in that region, when we would go to different schools and play sports, or I was in the band, but we would play, whatever, and visit other schools. They made fun of us. They called us wetbacks. They called us beaners. And Texas football was king, right? And so all the cars, they'd have like shoe polish, like "Go
Yeah.
team, go," right? But they'd call us beaners. They'd spell it out on their cars, right? They'd have posters. They'd say, wetbacks, go back to Mexico, learn how to read and write. Nothing but teenagers and drug dealers, pregnant teenagers and drug dealers, right? That's what people thought about us. And we were very proud, right? But also very, very under-resourced.
You say the word beaner, and we it's so funny when you say like we own that word, and that feels very, like we would always say like, if you were weak, es que no comió frijoles, right? And I always talk about my baby, like his picture, his contact picture on his iPhone is a bowl of frijoles. Like that's his favorite meal. Like there is nothing better. And, my mom's been in the hospital for almost 2 months, and she gets out next Wednesday. And she was saying, she's like, cuando llegue a la casa, quiero un plato de frijoles. And so I'm like, when we call each other beaners, we're like, oh, you're such a beaner. But it's like, but we love beans.
Right,
And
right.
I think that that's kind of what you're saying is like when you identify a word, it may be derogatory when someone else says it to you, but
Right.
when you say it, it's almost like a term of endearment.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so we could, I do think we had a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because of that, and it was difficult, to navigate through that world, and even afterwards. But the other thing that I learned since then was the legacy of the town, which I think is really important to probably what we're going to be talking about in a little bit, was that, I think in Texas, the Chicano movement was probably different than most of the other places, other parts of the country. And I think, maybe many of your listeners are aware of, it started in different ways and different things, but one of the most, I think, defining moments of the Chicano movement was in 1967, 68, I can't remember. In Denver, there was sort of a convention where young people, mostly teenagers, high school kids and early college kids, went to Denver. I think it was over 1,000 folks. Don't quote me on all this stuff, but they
It's on tape. It's too late.
Someone will give us the absolute correct information. But the gist of it is that there was a large convening of young Mexican American people in Denver, and they came up with sort of like a code, right, a declaration, and they began to organize. And so all over California, through the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, of course, Texas, you would see a lot of the things over the next few years. And so in our town of Robstown, there was a walkout in 1972. And because of the way the Mexican American students were being treated. And, it caused a lot of challenges, and it caused a lot of people to get scared. I would say the non-Mexican community.
Yeah.
And they fled. They left, right? And so when they left, the town was under-resourced, right? Because who was left was the working class.
Right.
And so we became one of the poorest towns in the region, some say in the state of Texas. And so we didn't have a lot of the resources that other places had, right? So it was, there's something really beautiful about that idea of, self-realization and but then also what it also led to us being under-resourced and
Right.
undervalued, right? And so, but at the same time, what we'd have to do is find our value within ourselves, which was a lot of times our culture, right?
Yeah.
The music we were talking about Selena at the beginning, and the food, right? And the things that I remember the most was all of those things that we valued and that were important to
Right.
us, not what other people were putting on value or valuing us. And even recently I believe during sometime in the last few years, there was an article, and it was listed as one of the worst places to live in America because of the home values, right? And so people were there like, but we're happy.
Yeah.
This is our home.
And we have a
right?
home.
Right. Like this is like whose definition, right?
Well, and if we talk about that, like, then you have cities where the home values are so high that you have all the homelessness
Right.
and, like all these other displaced people because you can't afford to live there. So I think it's also the lens you look at it through.
Right, and it was an economic
Yeah.
article, right? And so it's very interesting. It helped me kind of think about those things, and so it certainly laid the path for me of what my life would be from an artistic and I guess cultural and I would say even like a social worker sort of a lens of
Yeah.
cultural social worker, maybe we would say, of thinking about the haves and the have-nots, and how do we create with what we have? How do we advocate for what we have? So
And then, okay,
Yeah.
so you went through schooling and then you got to college, and I love this story because I think a lot of people will not only like empathize, but I think it's like we've all felt it. You got to college and you felt like you were really behind.
Oh yeah. So when I I went to college at Baylor University and for music, and so going a little bit back, my band director in Robstown, he was a part of that walkout during that movement, and he loved cars, and the counselor said, "Well, you can just be a mechanic." He said, "No, I want to be a band director." She said, "No, you have to be a mechanic. You can't be a band director." And so he worked years and years and years, and finally got his degree and worked hard and got it, and started working, and then eventually became the band director at Robstown. And I was just saying, the last couple of years, finally, the band made it to the state championships.
Nice.
For the
Nice.
first time in the history, and he spent his whole career doing that. But my point is that he broke the glass ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Because he was not supposed to. And so when I went to college, when I was a big fish, I was like, oh, the best flute player, or whatever. But when I got
Best
to college,
flute player, Robstown.
right? There were a couple of us that, so I wasn't the best, but it was, I was, big fish in a small pond, right?
Yeah.
And when I went to college, I realized that I didn't know anything, right? And all the kids from Houston and Dallas and Austin, had private lessons and really expensive professional instruments, and that's a huge thing. Like I didn't have a professional instrument, and it affected my technique, and so I was learning and doing things incorrectly to overcompensate for my instruments. So my fingers were tight and my throat was tight, right? And I didn't realize. So all kinds of things that I was doing, and all these kids would like know all of these things that they learned in public school in Dallas and Houston and music theory classes and stuff that I didn't even know what music theory was, right?
Yeah.
And so that phrase fall off the turnip truck. Well, I fell off the cotton truck, right? Like I had no idea.
what
I was
happened?
like,
Yeah.
where am I, right? So I was so behind, and I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and kept trying. And I didn't want to be a band director. I wanted to get a performance degree, right? In retrospect, like that wasn't really gonna be in the cards for me. But again, the idea was that I was wanting to do something that someone said you can't do, right? They're like, and funny, they said, well, you can't be a performance major. You have to be a band director. And so
Because that guy was a band director,
Right.
so we can make band directors.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so it was interesting how, that glass ceiling. So anyway, I transferred to North Carolina School of the Arts, and even there, it was a fascinating place because it was a junior high school, college, and graduate school all in one, right? And when I got there were high school freshmen who could play circles around me, right? Like prodigies, right? So it just further, but he accepted me, and, I was, again, still behind, right? And, there were only 2 or 3 spots in the orchestra, I usually was never one of them. So it was tough, but it was there that I had the ability to see all of the other art forms and experience them. And then outside of school, I started dancing and doing theater and all kinds of, and studying voice and different things. So it really helped me. It gave me the opportunity to
Round yourself out.
right,
Or see other things.
right, and do a lot of things that I've always wanted to do that I didn't have the opportunity to do.
There was an article, and I can't remember what magazine I read it in. It was The Economist or one of those, like, about,
Yeah.
and it said that the best way for upward mobility is not education. It is not, finding more money, et cetera. It was seeing what it looked like, having the experiences, because then you knew what that looked like or felt like, et cetera. So, like,
Right.
in Robstown, you were huge for Robstown. And as you experienced more, you were like more aware of what you could shoot for.
Right.
And I
right.
think a lot of times in our community, we don't always see everything that's available. Like
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from Lane Tech here in Chicago, and then I went to UIC because that's where everyone else went. And I would, now that I'm like talking to my kids, and they're like, one of them is in seventh grade and one is in eighth grade, and they're like, we want to go to this university. I'm like, I still don't know that university. Like, where did you hear that word? So it's just like, I think the more you see and experience, and like your vision gets broader.
Right. That's absolutely. I would love to read that article because I think that's been my life is, expanding my. Had a teacher. She said her horizontals. She'd expand her horizontals. She was from Laredo. I expand my horizontals. She was hilarious. But anyway, expanding our horizons and. The more you can see, then the more it can influence what you do and how you might do it and do it differently, right? And so, that was really helpful for me. And after that, after I graduated, I had been dancing and doing theater and singing and of course music. And I opened a small music school off the coast of Honduras, on a little island called Roatan. Was there for a couple of years, right before Hurricane Mitch, and it was a big deal. And then I moved back to the States to study ballet, and I just went down a path, right, where I was able to continue just exploring and developing as an artist in all kinds of ways, which, there was a lot in between that, but I met my wife and we moved to North Carolina, and I started doing a lot of community work and in the arts and different things. And eventually, after a few years, we landed in Nashville. I was the superintendent of cultural arts for the city of Nashville under the Park District. I think I was around 30, and it was incredible. I loved that job. I had museums and visitor centers and dance, music, theater. I had a senior citizen dance company in the program. We had a youth ballet. We had professional art classes. I started a ballroom dance program. Back in the day, they called it inner city. I don't think we use that word anymore, but and so it was lovely. And I had to open a Civil War Visitor Center, and I was looking for descriptions of interns to open it, and I came across the job description for the founding director of Shy Arts. And I saw it, and I didn't apply at first, and I told my wife about it, and she said, well, free trip to Chicago.
Yeah, let's just go check it out. Yeah.
And here we are, 50 years, 60 years later. But, it was, and that's a whole another story, but, I've missed I skipped over a lot of things, but, it was really a path that has led me on this creative path of.
Yeah, but you landed in Chicago, and it wasn't easy, right? Because you encountered some pushback when you were working at Shy Arts.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that the idea of Shy Arts was to help diversify the arts community of Chicago, right? And Chicago is a world cultural capital, and if you look at many of the arts
What does
institutions,
it mean to be a world cultural capital?
Yeah, you have one of the top 5 symphonies in the world, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, right? You have no, it's a very subjective thing, but it is widely.
It's high five.
Yeah, it's subjective, but it's widely recognized, right?
Yeah.
The Lyric Opera of Chicago, right? A major opera house in the world. You have the Art Institute of Chicago, right? And then you have recognized dance companies like Hubbard Street for contemporary dance. You have Joffrey Ballet for contemporary ballet or ballet, and so you have a lot of world-class organizations. Of course, the theater community, Steppenwolf, Looking Glass, Goodman, Chicago Shakes. These are companies that help put Chicago on the map as a theater
Yeah.
town, right? And so it's really an incredible place for artists to live. But the interesting thing is that, at least back in the day, when we started the school, most of the participants as performers, as professionals, let's say most, were not from Chicago. In fact, particularly in some of those organizations, they're not even from the United States, right? And so it's great that people from around the world can come here and have a career in the arts, but the kids who grew up here,
Right.
not so. Now, my definition of the arts has changed, right? Because in that world, we think about those Western classical arts. But now we have a better understanding and thinking that the arts is a lot more than just those organizations, which are fantastic, but there's a whole lot of other things that have been going on for years, decades, that have been dismissed, right?
Yeah.
But so anyway, Shy Arts was created to help diversify the arts community, and I said, this is a great idea, but it's not going to work. And they said, we just hired you and moved you here. What do you mean? I said, well, if you look at all of the art schools, whether the colleges, the conservatories, or even the top high schools in the country, none of them are diverse. So if you're going to open an art school, it'll be like the others,
Right.
not diverse.
Right.
Who goes to those schools? Kids who've been dancing since they were 5, kids who have had private lessons since they were little, right?
Right.
Kids who have a parent who can shuttle them back and forth to lessons and highlight, and make sure that you practice, Timmy, and all that, and all of these things. So, it was really it's like a whole different world, right? And so to have this idea, I said, we're going to have to do something completely different. So what I said was that we needed to be able to find a way to train students who have little to no training. And that's what we did. And so the idea was that we, in 3.5 years, by the time they were ready to audition for college, that they could be prepared to audition for these schools. And it
love
goes
that.
back to that whole beginning of the story of being behind, because I knew what it took, right?
To get to where you need to be by college.
Right.
Yeah.
And those kids weren't feel. So the kids who go to Shy Arts never feel what I felt. I wanted to ensure that they knew all the things that people were gonna, that they might need to know and beyond, like have more knowledge, and it's worked. In fact, it has worked almost as a. It's been interesting because like some of the kids, especially kids of color, and I would say especially our beautiful, amazing young black females, when they go to college and they can answer all the questions, the professors will look at them like, how do you know that? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's almost like they have to prove that they know what they just said, right? But at least they have that information. And so then all of these students become like the leaders. They get the scholarships, they're getting the opportunities, right? Of course, it comes with some hate and some like things that they have to deal with. But it's better that than the opposite of not knowing and then being excluded because you don't have enough.
And then you start self-censoring because then you feel stupid and you don't want to say something because what if you say it the wrong way or pronounce it the wrong way? And I think that that's beautiful because when you, and it's something that I think a lot of us feel is that we don't want someone else to feel what we felt.
Right.
And so fast forward, how did you land here?
Well,
and how do I get an office here?
Well, this was, I think, so yeah, I decorated the office, and I think in a way it's like a love letter to my family, my culture, and this is hard for me to say, but I think even to myself, which I had a therapy session earlier today. So
Me too.
Therapy is good, but it really is. It was like sometimes I've had the imposter syndrome my entire life, right? And so being able to say that you deserve something, right? And so I would say it's a love letter to myself, to what I've done. I've never said that before, but it has been such a remarkable experience being here at the museum. It's like a second life for me. Like I really loved what we did at Shy Arts, and I'm so glad to see what young people are doing now with their lives. But my child now goes to school there, and it was hard, and I just had to separate, right, to be a parent and not know all the ins and outs, and so Last summer, we went to Texas for my parents' celebration of life, and I realized how much of myself I had turned off to be able to do what I was doing. I had to sort of like give myself away and turn parts of myself off in order for the different worlds and different folks and different communities that we were working with to be able to. I was making myself more palatable for them, right? In order to gain the opportunities and the resources they need to do this work, which, help these young people do create this incredible art. So anyway, I went home and realized that, and I came back and I realized I don't know if I could ever give enough. I'm not going to be able to give any more. And so I called Koya, the search firm, and I said, I think I'm ready. And she said, well, guess what? Just today, I posted the job for the National Museum of Mexican Art. And I cried, and I said, well, I'm not even going to pretend that, I'm not going to get too excited, but wow, that would be amazing.
You get me like
Yeah.
emotional. I think this is like a homecoming then.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though Pilsen isn't my home, and but it feels like my home,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I talked about when I first got here that like the museum's a lighthouse for Mexicanos, right? For us to, whether we're first generation or fifth generation, you grew up in Pilsen your entire life, or your last name is Perez and you have no idea what that means, and you don't speak English or you don't speak Spanish. Like, it doesn't matter, right? You
Yeah.
come here and you can just feel like you're a part, right? And even if you're not even Mexican American or Latino, or you can walk in and still feel something and feel connected to it. And yeah, I think that's how I feel about the museum. Like, it really is a home, and it should be a home. And what a privilege it is. But there's also a responsibility, right, for us to tell our stories. And we call this a first voice institution, because we're telling our stories through our voice, right? If you go to some of these wonderful, incredible institutions, you can see, an exhibit of indigenous Native American or Polynesian or Mexican or whatever, and they probably were not curated by those people who from those regions, right?
Yeah.
And so it was told by an anthropologist or whatever, which they can do great work, but this is different, where we're telling our stories and the stories that we believe are important to our community. And so it is a really interesting place because we are a national museum, and most people don't realize that Chicago has the second largest Mexican population in the country, which probably means in the world, right? Outside of Mexico, right? And so people are astonished, yeah, so. During the DNC, some state officials from Texas came by, and I gave them a tour, and they were just, Texas.
Blown away,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm from Texas, right? And people from Texas think, you just have this feeling like, we don't need the rest of you. Like, Texas feels like it's the capital of the world, right?
You
And
are so Texan.
I know, right? And so I'm not saying it should or is. I have different feelings now about it, but at least that was sort of like the way we're socialized, right? To think. And so when they came, they were so amazed and in such wonderment of what was here, and in the best way possible, like almost a little jealous. They're like, why don't we have something like this, right? But it was
Because we have it.
I know. It's such a gift, right, to share it.
is.
It's one of the greatest gifts gift for me, but also a gift that I can give, or that we can give to our community.
Oh, Jose, thank you.
Oh gosh,
Thank you.
I'm sorry I rambled so much.
No, you did not ramble. No, you're fine. I actually think your story is beautiful, and I know that sometimes we see people like you in a position where you are like in charge of this museum, and we see the exhibits, and we just see how great it's going, and to kind of hear that, what you felt like us, right? You always felt behind. There are words I don't say because I didn't feel comfortable saying, or
Right.
things I did, like books I didn't read, when everyone's like, oh, all right, well, we all read these in high school. And I was like, I didn't read those in high school.
know, right?
And so that catch up feeling, and then making sure that, we try to avoid that for future generations, I think is probably the biggest gift we could give.
Right.
And the fact that you hold like our culture in this building and provide that home, that's a really big responsibility. And I know that just talking to you, and now that you guys have met Jose, like, that he is the right person to carry the torch. So,
Well, if I can just say one more thing,
Yeah, of
and
course.
we're out of time, but I have to give all the love and credit to, all the folks who built this place, right? I'm in the enviable position to come in when it's just it's a
Already
well-oiled
created.
machine.
Yeah.
I mean, the expertise on the staff, Cesario, our curator, I'm just blown away. I mean, so many of the staff members, I could name them all. I feel like they're all experts at what they do. I mean, the gentleman who painted my office, right? Like, everyone who works here
Yeah.
loves the place so much and cares for it so much. And of the directors that I have that report to me, the one who's been here the least amount of time is 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
between 10 to 37 years. Yeah.
Well, and okay, so
And I was
the
gonna say
last
what-
Jose who had this job.
Carlos.
Yeah,
Okay.
Carlos, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Carlos had the job. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But Carlos had the job before Jose. Like he was here for what?
34.
Yeah, I was
34
gonna say it was
years,
like
yeah.
something
Yeah,
over
yeah,
30 years.
yeah.
So like when he that's so symbolic. Like
Right.
it's it's crazy. That means that when you get here, you understand like the value this is to the community
Right,
and
right,
what
right.
we do. And so
Well, yeah, and I was going to say he has
Yeah.
been such a gift and so helpful, and he people don't believe me that he really has said it's yours now, mijo, and he helps me when I need it, and he gets excited about certain things, but he really has been very helpful to me, introducing me to people, sharing all the background. I know so much because he and the staff and the board have just really given me all the information and steps that I need. So it's just been glorious, and I'm so fortunate. So I appreciate the work that you do, like sharing our
thank you.
stories. It's just I can tell you have such a passion for it, right?
I do. I think it's how we lift others up.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. It's a little humbling, but I love who we are as a people, and I love our culture and all that we are. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jose.
Thank you. I
Felicidades,
appreciate it. Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
And, if you want to, check out what the museum's doing, they do throw great parties.
You do.
And we'll have a link to the museum so that you guys can check it out. And if you're in Chicago, come visit and
Yeah.
take a tour and see our culture and our art.
It's free every
Oh,
day.
yeah. It's
Every day.
free.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're open longer than some of the bigger museums. So.
All right. Well, join us next time on Corporate Cafecito. Thank you so much.